Hello, everyone. Welcome to our environmental reinforcers Q&A. Unfortunately, no one has been able to join us live, but you'll all get the recording. Let's dive right in. So our first question, how do you get started when you haven't used the environment as a reinforcer before, or at least not on purpose, and now you want to use it more formally? How do you teach the dog when the reinforcer is accessible and why it is only sometimes accessible? And how do you avoid the dog becoming confused? For example, if you let them chase squirrels, but only sometimes, and other times you expect them to ignore squirrels. That's an excellent question. And because we don't have a lot of questions here today, I'll use this one to get us started and really explain the concept from the beginning. So anyone watching this who is new to the idea of using the environment as a reinforcer in dog training has a starting point. So I'm going to go a little further back than even this question. So first of all, we have to understand that anything that is a distraction your dog is interested in, not fearful of, but interested in terms of they want it, or they want to get to it. So anything that is that kind of distraction is likely also a reinforcer. It's the same thing, but we can look at it as a distraction. We are annoyed by it. It's a distraction. We just want to practice obedience or whatever, or walk on a loose leash, but our dog is distracted, so we are annoyed. However, when we look at it as a reinforcer, we can see an opportunity to train. So that's why I like the second way of framing things better. An example here would be, like in the question, the squirrels, right? So if you look at them as a distraction, you may be annoyed because your dog is pulling left and right on the walk in an attempt to chase them. On the other hand, if you shift your perspective and look at the squirrels as a reinforcer, you can now use this opportunity to ask something from your dog. For example, loose leash walking, right? Without ripping your arm out. And then you could release your dog to chase the squirrels. So now you both get what you wanted. Sticking with this example, in order for this to work, your dog needs to know how to walk on a leash if there are no squirrels present first, right? So if they always pull, you can't expect them to suddenly not pull in the most difficult scenario when there are prey animals present. You need to teach them not to pull first. Then you can bring this well-known behavior into the arena that is teeming with squirrels and ask for it, or just expect it by default. For example, I have an informal heel I can cue my dogs to do. We've practiced this in many places. If she's not in an informal heel, she's free to do whatever she wants, within reason, of course. So if I walked her on a leash and I knew squirrels really excited her, I might ask for that informal heel and walk a little bit. She already knows the cue well because we've practiced among lesser distractions. Then I'd use my release cue to the environment after just a few steps. You just got a huge reinforcer for a small amount of impulse control. And the next time, you'll ask for a few more steps before releasing your dog to chase squirrels, and so on. So in this situation, the way you cue the reinforcer, freedom to chase squirrels, depends on the vocabulary and unspoken agreements you share with your dog. For example, I have named critter chasing. I call the behavior birds because years ago, when I first put it on cue, birds were our first critters. But it refers to any potential prey animal I'm willing to let my dogs chase. I could also just use the word okay, which is my generic release cue. If the dog knows it is a release cue, they will know you are releasing them to whatever it is they most want in the environment. And in our example, that would be the squirrel that dog already knows is there. I'm just used to saying birds, so that's what I do rather than a generic okay. Also, like having birds separately on cue allows me to tag, right, a reinforcer coming from me versus birds, which means a reinforcer from the environment. But in a way, okay, would probably also do that. So the way I start this is when my dogs are off leash and I can see that they're about to chase something. So in that instance, I would just name the behavior. So I'd just say birds before they took off after a cat or rat or bird anyways. And the dog will learn by association, just like any other behavior we put a cue in front of. And the second question was, how do we teach the dog when the reinforcer is available and how do we avoid confusing them? if the reinforcer is only available some of the time? That's a great question. I hadn't even thought of in that particular way. And I think the reason I haven't had to think about it is something that has nothing to do with environmental reinforcers as such, but it is actually about how I live with my dogs in general. It's about clarity, context, and reliable boundaries. So I found that really interesting. So let me just take a detour down this rabbit hole. Depending on where I walk my dogs, there's a default state of mind they will be in. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. Depending on how you and your dog communicate, you could cue that state of mind, or you could let the context do the cueing for you. For me, if we're on a nature hike, the default for my dogs is what Chachak calls the find your own fun window. That means they can do pretty much anything they want. And so when we're hiking in the middle of nowhere, they're allowed to chase anything they want unless told otherwise. They are always allowed. So they are by default allowed to chase squirrels, right? When we're hiking in the middle of nowhere. So they aren't confused. They aren't confused there. They know that I will let them chase. But sometimes if I'm working on strengthening a particular behavior in a new environment, I might spot a squirrel at the same time as my dog does, and I might ask for that behavior while we're on the hike in the middle of nowhere. Anytime I ask for a particular behavior, we exit what Chachak calls the find your own fun window, and we are now in the obedient window. We are now in an unless told otherwise scenario. So I'm telling my dog otherwise, right? So the default right now does not apply. You can't chase that squirrel. And I expect my dog to do the behavior I just cued. If I wasn't sure that they could, I would either not ask in that situation, but practice in easier environments first some more, or I would have them on a long line so I can keep them from chasing that squirrel until they have followed my cue first. And I'm more patient than my dog is, so they will do the behavior eventually, and then I can release them. So once the dog has done the behavior, I will release them back into the find your own fun window with my marker cue birds. I just reinforced that behavior big time. And chances are that next time they'll be able to sit or stand or roll over or, I don't know, shake my hand right away. So since my dogs love working, it isn't a negative experience to be told to do something before some of their squirrel chases. And in fact, I sometimes get the impression that they enjoy a cued chase more than an uncued one. That is interesting. I do not know if there are studies on this, if there's formal research, if that is like an example of contra freeloading. I don't know, but I can see sometimes that if I ask my dog to do something and then I cue birds, they run off even faster than they would if I didn't cue them. I don't know why, but it seems cool and it's fun for all of us. And I assume that this is partially breed-related, right? Because I have a Malinois and a Border Collie. Different dogs may be less inclined to do what you ask for them, what you ask of them in order to quote unquote earn that chase. Now, let's say we walk in the city. Here, my default expectation is different from the middle of nowhere. My dog will likely be off leash in both scenarios, but the city has more default rules. So the city is what Chachak would call the calm liberty window. You get to do what you want, but you can't run off and disappear somewhere. And I expect you to keep a smaller radius around me. I also expect you to never step off the sidewalk unless cued to do so. My dogs know that. So if there is a squirrel on the other side of the street, they will not go for it. They may look at it longingly, but their arousal stays relatively low because I hardly ever use something across the street as a reinforcer. They don't expect that they will get to chase that squirrel. I will use this sometimes, mainly to reinforce stopping at the boundary of the sidewalk, but it's rare. So to answer the question, my dogs are not confused because we have clear default assumption. Hold on. There is okay, sorry. There was a computer pop-up thingy that I needed to attend to. Okay, where was I going? So my dogs are not confused because we have clear default assumptions of what behaviors are and what behaviors are not appropriate and under what circumstances which one applies. So it really comes down to clarity for my dogs. So different environments come with different kinds of freedoms, boundaries, and expectations for my dogs. Because these expectations are the same, for example, in all urban environments versus all nature environments, my dogs just read the room and fall into their default state of mind, unless told otherwise. It's the clarity of what I expect of them that allows them a great degree of freedom, and it also keeps stress levels low. And when I say stress here, I'm referring to distress. Stress levels usually spike, distress levels, right? Spike because of a lack of clarity. That is different from arousal. Arousal isn't necessarily a bad thing. It happens when you have fun too. So when we're on a nature hike, my dogs are aroused because they get to run around like maniacs. That's not bad arousal. It's eustress, not distress. If your dog was confused about whether or not they were allowed to chase a squirrel, that's where I'd look for an answer, right? On the clarity front, rather than on the environmental reinforcers front. Does this make sense? Also, to be clear, your default can be whatever you want it to be. My default is find your own fun and chase all the squirrels you want, if we're in the middle of nowhere, right? And still like calm liberty if we're in the city. You could just as well have a default of never chase squirrels unless told that you can. It doesn't matter what the default is, but it matters that you be consistent. That's what is going to keep your dog from getting confused. So I hope this helps. And if not, feel free to email me at caden.christopher, no H after the C, at gmail.com, and we can work on it one-on-one. All right. The next two questions are excellent, and they are from all the way over in New Zealand from Xuan and Suki. As the dog will decide what the reinforcer is, and presumably levels of reinforcement at that time, how do you ensure that accessing the reinforcer is not going to lead to over-arousal issues, frustration later on? Example, if Suki finds a good wrestle highly motivating, but the other dog is her friend, a border collie, she's not saying hi until she has calmed down sufficiently and has her mind. That's an excellent question. So my assumption here is that the border collie doesn't like to wrestle, right? So I hope that this is correct. Suki is a bully breed mix, so I imagine she loves wrestling and playing rough, etc. Some dogs like this play style, and others would hate it. So if her border collie friend would rather play chase but not be touched, let alone wrestle to the ground, absolutely, I agree. Suki needs to be calm before she gets access to the border collie, because otherwise, since she is certainly larger and heavier than a border collie, she might accidentally be unfairly rude to her friend. In this particular scenario that I am picturing, and I wish you were on here live with me, Xuan, because then I could reality check whether my mental image is correct. So I am picturing a very excited Suki who sees her friend, wants to run over and start a good wrestle. While the border collie sees Suki, gives her a little wag of acknowledgement, and would then like to sniff and explore together, or maybe play a brief game of chase now and then. So two very different expectations of what fun play looks like. A good time means something different to both dogs. If this is the scenario, and so like if this isn't, if this isn't the scenario, just reach out to me via email and I'll answer for the actual scenario. But if it is the scenario, I wouldn't use the border collie as a reinforcer right away. I would only use a dog as a reinforcer right away if that other dog friend had the exact same play style as Suki, right? So if you have two pitties and they both like to wrestle and they are friends and know each other, you can ask for any behavior and then release them both at the same time, you and your friend, your human friend who has the other one, and they can go wrestle it right up. This is, of course, assuming those two dogs are friends and they both know each other's play style and appreciate it. In that case, yes, go for it. There's no need to calm down first, because being excited about wrestling, that's not a problem as long as the other person also likes wrestling in the same way, right? It's only a problem if your expectations about how this meeting is going to go look very different. So in case of the border collie, I would not, of course, use the border collie as a reinforcer right away, just like you described in your question. And that's because access to the border collie would be most reinforcing to Suki when she first sees the border collie and really wants to run up and body slam them. And we won't allow that because the border collie would find it highly disrespectful, and that's not fair, right? I imagine by the time Suki has calmed down enough to be able to freely interact with the border collie, the interaction isn't all that exciting anymore. You'd want her in a state where the greeting is just a quick sniff and then do your own thing again, if they aren't off leash together. So you'd probably parallel walk for a while after first meeting before letting that quick sniff happen. If you do this often enough and always start with a predictable structure, loose leash parallel walking at a distance from each other, for example, over time, the loose leash walking may become easier. If so, part of the reason will be that the opportunity to greet the border collie has reinforced the loose leash walking. So by means of not giving Suki access to her friend until she's calm, you should over time see Suki offer calm behavior sooner and sooner after first seeing the border collie, because the border collie itself becomes the cue to be a good loose leash walker in order to go and say hi. If this is happening, you know that the calm greeting is a reinforcer. However, if Suki's arousal stays high or grows over time, the calm greeting is not reinforcing. Or let's say the positive valence of calmly greeting is not as strong as the negative valence of having to be calm when Suki would like to go up and say hi. In the latter case, you get frustration, and it wouldn't be a result of greeting. It would be a result of not being allowed to greet, right? So clarity might make a difference here too. If Suki doesn't know how you expect her to behave around the border collie, she can't meet her your expectations, while what she wants, her friend, is right there. So that's very frustrating. It's like the kind of frustration that I experience when I'm on a call with a friend, and for some reason, the connection is terrible. I know my friend is right there on the other end of the line or behind my screen, but I don't know how or what I can do to make the connection better. That is super frustrating. If I knew that all I had to do was go closer to the router or move to a different room with better cell service, it wouldn't be frustrating at all because I would do it right away and solve the problem. Does this make sense? So in the same vein, greeting Suki's border collie friend either already is a reinforcer because she knows what to do in order to earn permission to greet. And if that is the case, you can start adding in more other behaviors before allowing them to greet each other. For example, if at first it was just loose leash walking for a minute, later it can be loose leash walking, a sit and a hand touch, or anything else you want to throw in there and are currently practicing. On the other hand, if Suki's arousal is consistently high and or is even increasing from one meeting to the next, the border collie is not currently, or meeting the border collie is not currently reinforcing, that's frustrating. So here, not unlike my first example in the previous question, you need to help Suki understand what is required of her in order to access her friend. Or you may want to choose not to use the border collie as a reinforcer and just not go for a walk with that friend, right? But I would probably try to make clear what the criteria for saying hi are, because I'm assuming Suki likes that friend and that friend likes Suki, and you like going for a walk with your friend who is Suki's person. So I wouldn't want to give up on that right away. I would want to help her become clear on the expectation first and then see if that works. And so helping her understand, that may mean physically or with verbal cues showing her what you need her to do and what you don't want her to do. No pulling, lunging, or barking. Yes to calm walking by your side. If you have a walking route you regularly use when Suki has already practiced the unwanted frustration-based behavior, change the picture. That can make a huge difference. Meet up in a new place where the frustration-based behaviors are not a habit yet. Or meet up after Suki's walk or after a game of fetch rather than before, so she has had some time to burn off energy and is more easily able to say hi without losing her shit. I hope this helps. All right, on to the second question from Schwan. An environmental reinforcer, like all reinforcers, will vary depending on the dog's mood at that stage. How do you set the dog up to succeed, to say, yes, you can go sniff for a certain period of time, and then I need you back? Say a sudden distraction appears, but the reinforcer is normally a 2 on the woohoo scale, but on this occasion, it has the bestest, smelliest horse poo and becomes an 8. So I'm asking how to manage a reinforcer that varies in value and still have the dog listen and respond when required. That's another great question. Smells are particularly tricky distractions because we humans don't know how great something smells unless we know what it is. And more often than not, we don't know that unless it is a visible thing or it is a distraction smell we planted on purpose. This is unfortunately one of those it depends answers we give way more often than we'd like in dog training. I like that you introduced the idea of a woohoo scale and knowing, oh, I'm sorry, still coughing, and knowing the baseline for your particular dog. That is crucial. So I'm saying you'd want to know how long Suki generally sniffs until she's ready to move on. That is something that varies depending on what the smell is and who the individual dog is. However, if you usually walk in your neighborhood, for example, you will, after living with Suki for a while, have a good idea how long she typically sniffs, say, street corners. Let's say she likes a good 30-second sniff, and you are aware of what street corners she typically sniffs. It's probably always the same ones, and that's the ones that other dogs pee on regularly. So when you first introduce sniffing these particularly exciting spots as a reinforcer, you'd name them right as Suki is about to approach him and get a good sniff. Many folks say, go sniff for this, for example. And then you'd let her sniff until she got her full 30-second sniff in. If you're walking in your neighborhood on a leash, this is a great opportunity to practice both using Suki's favorite sniffable corners as a reinforcer and practicing impulse control. So sometimes you'd send her to go sniff, and other times you could ask her to leave it or to heel past without an opportunity to sniff. For it to be a useful reinforcer, you need to be able to both give and prevent access first, right? If you have her on a leash, preventing access is easy. You just don't let her get to the corner unless you cue her that she can go there. Obviously, that would not apply to every corner and every walk. I just want to make this clear in terms of how I go for walks, right? I want my dogs to have freedom on walks and enjoy just being a dog and exploring the world. But you can have also little points of connection along your walk where you ask for behavior in the presence of a distraction, or if there's no distraction, either way. But once you can do that, for example, with a leave it or a heel past an interesting smell at the usual sniffy corner, you can then start adding the go sniff as a release cue after heeling past and run back to the corner together. So you walk at liberty on a loose line, and occasionally you ask for behavior and reinforce with Suki's favorite spots to sniff. Once this goes well, so at this point you have sniffing on cue, and you also have leave it on cue, and you know that Suki typically satiates after 30 seconds of sniffing street corners. Now you can start making things harder by interrupting her sniffing. I'd start this with uncued sniffing. So Suki walks at liberty with you, sniffs a corner. After 20 seconds or so, call her back to you. She has already sniffed for a while, but not her full 30 seconds. But she has already gotten some satisfaction out of this, right? So you can now use her leash to help her complete the recall if she's having a hard time, and then send her right back so she learns the fun isn't over when you call her away from something interesting. Over time, you can call her earlier and earlier, and then use the same spot as a reinforcer to send her back to investigate some more. I'd only do that once per spot in the beginning, and maybe forever, depending on how difficult it is for her. So then let's say you have been doing this successfully and can call Suki away at any point and send her back to sniff. Now let's look at your horse poop example. Let's assume horse poop is rare and more valuable to sniff than street corners. So you want to have a successful rate of 99.9% on street corners first, right? Then you're likely ready to simply tackle a recall in the middle of sniffing horse poop as well. Even if usually you let her sniff horse poop for as long as she wants, but it's in the middle of a logging road and a tractor is coming, you obviously have to interrupt her. So you'll call her before she's done. If you have worked with the easier sniff distractions before, she'll most likely do great, and you can send her back once the tractor has passed. And that will also function as a reinforcer for the recall you just did. If not, so if you have Suki on a long line, use the long line to encourage your recall cue. In this situation, you need to enforce it because obviously you don't want Suki to get run over by a tractor. If she was off leash, you'd walk over and enforce it by taking her collar or harness and leading her away. If you had to enforce it because she couldn't do it voluntarily, this will be great information. And you've got yourself a new training challenge, horse poop recalls. I know you have access to my calling all dogs class. Look at the distraction setups. You can do this kind of setup with horse poop, with long lines, barriers, and finally off leash. If you know someone who has a horse, ask them for some horse poop so you can practice in your own yard. I've actually done this myself when I lived in Austria and had a dog who liked eating horse poop. I had a colleague who had horses, and I got a bucket full of horse droppings from her for training purposes. It's actually a lot of fun. Let me end this presentation by showing you the videos of Phoebe learning to eat and recall away from horse droppings in my yard in Austria. Let's go back to, how do I do this? Presenter mode. All right. So we have, here we have Phoebe and horse poop on a long line.
Phoebe, come. Okay,
Nice job here. You held away from the horse poop before tightening the long line. And I'm encouraging her as she's eating. So I'm letting her know that I approve. Let's stop. Present something else. So after this successful recall on a long line, we move to an off-leash recall here.
Phoebe, come. Okay.
You did just as well. And you have right and medium and smitten horse too. One thing you may have noticed that I want to point out, hold on. Let me just, how do I stop presenting the bottom? There we go. All right. You may have noticed that I clicked and then pointed towards the horse poop for Phoebe to go and check it out. This is something the trainer I am today would not be doing. So today I would, because horse poop for me doesn't have a specific marker cue or release cue. So today I would just say, okay. And back then I didn't use location specific marker cues yet. That is something we talked about in our previous presentation. So back then, let me just take a look at when that video was from. That was 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, I didn't use multiple marker cues yet. And so I clicked and then pointed at the reinforcer that I meant for her to approach. Yeah, so I hope this was helpful. If it wasn't, you know where to find me. Everyone, have a great day, stay dangerous, and have fun training your dogs. Bye.